Hi, this is Will from Fracture Sounds, and this is the walkthrough video for our new library, Arco. Arco is an ensemble of 4 pianos which we placed in a hall and performed them with a range of extended techniques. So this patch is the main bowed sustain patch. It's perfect for these kind of big organic textural pads. So this library was recorded in quite a large concert hall, and we have these 3 mic perspectives for you to mix between. So here's the close mics. And the mid mics. And the far mics. And we've also got this nice little feature, which is the perspective slider. And this lets you easily crossfade between the different mic positions. And this is really useful for easily bringing the instrument up close or pushing it further back. And this is also mapped to CC22, or you can assign this to any fader you like. So you can see here we have dynamic control with the mod wheel, and this is moving between separate dynamic recordings. So you can get some really expressive kind of swells out of this. And next we have the texture control, which is linked to CC2 by default, but you can map this to any other fader. So the texture control is quite a unique feature. It's actually morphing between 2 separate recordings, and with this dial all the way up, you get more of a muted sound where the dampers were lightly touching the strings. So you get a lot more harmonic resonance and a lot of the overtones coming through. Quite a lot of bow noise comes out as well. In general, just a much grittier sound. So it's really nice to automate the dynamics and the texture together, like this. And you can get some really nice evolving sounds by controlling them both at the same time. And in addition to the dynamic control, the patch is also velocity sensitive. So if you play softly, you get quite soft attacks like that. If you play a bit harder, you get more immediate attacks. So it feels very responsive to play. And then combining this with the dynamics, and you can adjust this in the settings window here. So you can just turn this off, and then all the attacks will be the same. And if you want to add a bit more of an accent to the high velocities, just check this box here. You get really harsh attack. And that's disabled by default, but you can easily turn it on if you want it. And next over here we have the damping control, and this is basically controlling the release samples. So if I put it all the way down like this, you can hear that natural, really long release. And that's just the natural decay of the piano strings after we stopped bowing them. But if you want to tighten it up a bit, you can increase the damping here. And if you put this all the way to 100, you get a nice sharp release. And that's actually triggering a separate set of release samples where we release the sustain pedal just as we stop bowing. And that means even though the note cuts out quite quickly, you still get all the natural reverb in the far mics. And then down here we have the tightness control, and this is controlling the sample offset. So if you have it all the way down, you get a bit more of the natural bow noise just as the bow is starting to move. And if you turn this up, it trims the start of the samples a bit, so you get a more immediate start, but it also removes some of that bow noise, so it doesn't sound quite as natural. So you can set this parameter to your own personal taste. And then let's go into the settings page. So here we have some additional controls for the releases, so you can control the release volume. And then we also have control of the release offsets, so you can choose how far into the release sample it starts playing. So that's quite an immediate release. And with it all the way down, you get more of the bow noise as it stops moving on the string. We also have control over the dynamic range of the mod wheel. So if we have this all the way up, the sound actually cuts out to silence when the mod wheel is all the way down. Whereas with this control down, there isn't as much of a volume difference when you move the mod wheel. So this means you can use CC1 to control the timbre, and then you can use CC11 or the expression controller to have more control over the volume. And next we have the decrescendo decay, and this is a really cool feature because it adds a lot of extra realism when you're moving the dynamics. So to demonstrate what it does, I'll just disable the reverb so you can hear it more clearly. And then let's hear what it sounds like with it all the way down. So I'm moving the mod wheel up and down here, and you can probably notice the way it cuts out immediately doesn't sound very realistic. You'd expect to hear the strings ring out a bit after you've lowered the dynamics, and that's what this control does. So when you play a decrescendo, it's actually triggering some additional samples, which add that decay back in. And you can choose how much or little effect you want this to have. Just be aware that when you're using this feature, every time you play a decrescendo, it's going to be triggering extra voices, so keep an eye on the voice count. If the voice count is getting too high and your CPU is struggling, then putting the slider all the way down will disable this feature. So this is the sustain patch. Next I'm going to show you the plucks, which sound like this. So this patch almost sounds like a massive dulcimer. And it sounds really good if you play chords but kind of roll the notes. So now I'll show you how the different mic positions sound on this patch. So that's the close mic, very sharp and direct sound. The close mics actually sound very percussive in comparison to the other mics. You can kind of hear the plectrums against the strings a bit more. And then if we move the perspective up a bit, so you get more of the mid and far mics. And the hall we recorded in is quite nice because it doesn't sound overly drenched in reverb with the far mics, but it kind of just pushes it further back in the room. It kind of smears the transients a bit. And that's the ideal kind of room really when you're making sample libraries, because you have the ability to place the sound in the room and push it back, but you also have the flexibility to add as much or little reverb as you like. So again, in this patch we have the tightness control. It's quite an extreme setting, but you get the idea. Cuts into the notes a bit more. And again, we have the damping. So if you have this turned up, the notes are going to be quite sharp. And even with the damping all the way down, releasing the note does fade it out. And this also works with the sustain pedal. So if you want to sustain chords like this, you can do, and then release the pedal and the notes will cut out. So let's check out the soft spiccato next. So this is one of the short bowed articulations. And we also have the regular spiccatos, which is a bit of a sharper attack. And with this patch, we actually recorded short and long versions. So if you hold the notes down, you get the full decay. And if you release the notes, you get more muted spiccatos. So those are the spiccatos. Now let's try the plucked tremolos. And with this patch, you have control over the dynamics and speed. So speed is controlled by CC2 by default. And on this patch, I really like using the far mic because it blurs the notes together and creates a kind of distant, mushy texture. And finally, let's have a listen to the glissando effects. So these are quite interesting. The first set of effects we have here are looped glissando beds. So this is the lower range. And these are all recorded at multiple dynamic levels as well. Then we have the same again, but in the mid-range. And then a bit higher. And then the high strings here. And finally, the full range, all at the same time. And of course, you can mix all these together as well. So these are quite fun for building tension, maybe in horror scores. And then next here, we have some full ascending glissandos. And then we have a kind of a shorter variant of the same thing. And then descending. And again, a shorter variant. So in addition to these, we also have some economical patches, which are variations of the main patches with certain features removed to make it more CPU friendly. So this is the sustains, but we only have the open sustains built in, so the texture control won't do anything on this patch. And this basically means the voice count is going to be significantly reduced. So if you only need the open sustains and you're not going to use the texture control, then you might want to choose this patch instead. And then likewise, we have the same thing, but with just the muted sustains. So again, we don't have any texture control on this because it's just as if the texture was on full. And then next we have Super Eco. And this is basically just one dynamic layer. And we're using various techniques to kind of model the dynamics. And it sounds pretty good. And again, this is going to reduce the voice count by half. So if your CPU is struggling with the main patches, then these are the patches for you. And then the Hyper Eco is the same again, but we just have some various different default settings. So we've only got the middle mic, and also the decrescendo decay is disabled by default. And then lastly, we also created a set of patches which are just using the ribbon mics. So these are close mics only, so we don't have control over the mixer on these patches. But if I just bring up the main sustain patch and compare the two, I just solo the close mics. And then I'll try the ribbon. So the ribbon mic has a slightly warmer sound with maybe less of the shrillness in the high end. So you have the option to use these if you want. And then I'll just show you the plucks as well. And then compare it to the main Plucks patch. We'll just compare this chord here. So the close mic in the main patch contains a mixture of ribbon and condenser mics. So the condenser mics really add more of a pronounced top end here. So you can really hear the transient coming through. So if you want to tame the high end a bit and add a bit more warmth, then the ribbon mics are good for that. So those are the ribbon mics. You do have the option to download the ribbon mics separately, so you can choose whether or not you want to download the samples. And that's Arco. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, feel free to send us an email. And also be sure to listen to some of the music demos on our website so you can hear how the library sounds in a musical context. All right, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.